Over its 30-year history, it's fair to say that a lot of incredible games have graced PlayStation. Across 5 generations of consoles, 2 handhelds, and toes dipped into the VR waters, there are a lot to choose from. But we've put our heads together to narrow it down to the top 100 of all time. Now, what games do you see when you close your eyes and hear the word PlayStation? Now, while we've got a good amount of exclusives on this list, we of course have to include a fair few multi-platform classics as well. Now, our rule of thumb for those is when you think of that game, do you see a PlayStation banner at the top of its box? If so, well, it qualifies right here. Now, you'll see plenty of familiar faces here, from Crash to Kratos, but there will no doubt be some that surprise you as well. Now, have an opinion on what should be placed here? Well, let us know in the comments down below. So without further ado, here are the top 100 PlayStation games of all time.
Mascot platformers were all the rage at the height of the PS1 era, and hot on the heels of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, Sony opened a whole barrel of colorful new characters with Ape Escape, a family-friendly chimp hunting adventure that armed players with a slew of monkey-capturing gadgets. Ape Escape was popular enough to spawn many sequels and is still referenced as recently as in 2024's Astrobot, but perhaps its most important legacy was being the first game that could only be played with the newly released DualShock controller, introducing players to the world of dual analog sticks that would soon become not just the norm for PlayStation devices, but the industry standard to this day.
Gotcha! Yes!
Greetings, creatures of this blood. I come to compete.
Crash Bandicoot was Sony's answer to Nintendo's Mario, so naturally, if Mario had a kart racer, Crash needed one too. A shameless imitation of Mario Kart, Crash Team Racing is nonetheless a genuinely fun time with a great selection of tracks and all of the silly weapons and power-ups you'd expect from the genre. Just like his platforming though, Crash's driving isn't quite on par with his red-capped rivals, but still, CTR is a speedy party in its own right.
It's working! I've got a dragon!
Whoa, rough landing.
Ripto's Rage is the most complete Spyro package. More challenging than its predecessor, it improved on everything that everyone's favorite little purple dragon brought to the table the first time around. A certain Bandicoot may have ultimately come out on top as the original PlayStation's most beloved platforming mascot. He was, after all, the guy in the suit who showed up in PlayStation commercials, but Spyro certainly played his part. It's also notable and worth celebrating that both Spyro developer Insomniac and Crash studio Naughty Dog have together evolved into two of Sony's most important sources of blockbuster creativity from such humble and similar beginnings.
Impressive, most impressive. Please take this sacred, thingamajig as a token of our everlasting gratitude.
Jumping ahead a few console generations and taking a smaller detour, Little Big Planet developer Media Molecule reinvented its arts and crafts approach for portable gaming with Tearaway, one of the PS Vita's shining stars, truly showcasing the versatile little handheld's capabilities. Tearaway made innovative use of the console's rear touchpad and front-facing camera, letting you enter Tearaway's papercraft world by pushing your fingers through the landscape, or by having your own mug adorn the skies as a big colossal shining sun. But even without all the clever gimmicks and set dressing, Tearaway is still, at its core, just a great, charming platformer.
Come on, Colt, you gotta put this together.
Deathloop was an exciting and stylish new property from Arcane Lyon, the studio behind the Dishonored series. Microsoft acquired Arcane's parent company shortly before Deathloop's release, but the game still released as a timed exclusive for the PS5, and it was a good one. Echoing the outside-the-box creativity of Sony's best output, Deathloop is a time-looping shooter that is also a detective game and a PvP assassination sim. It's ambitious, but never to a fault.
I want you to remember why you came here.
generation. Where the hell am I?
It's a little ironic that most of the beloved PlayStation properties mentioned so far have since been acquired by Microsoft, but that is not the case for Jak and Daxter, who remain some of Sony's most beloved characters. Rockstar may have dominated the PS2 era of open-world games, but that didn't stop Naughty Dog from trying its hand as well. Jak 2 moved away from the mascot platform Bedrock of its predecessor to take Jak and his Ottsel companion Daxter to a hub-world city filled with danger. An ambitious pivot to a more combat-heavy focus, it was a gamble that paid off, as well as being one of the best-looking games of its generation.
I think the Baron set me up. Actually, I think everybody's trying to kill me.
Another colorful handheld platformer, Loco Roco is one of the PlayStation Portable's must-own games and one of the many examples of the out-there creativity that Sony's Japan studio contributed to PlayStation since the very beginning. A relatively simple concept based around the idea of rolling colorful jellies from point A to point B, it contained hidden complexities that accentuated its elegant design. Packed full of charm that threatened to burst out of its portable confines, it was a treat in every sense of the word. Another beloved Sony duo dating back to the PS2 era, Ratchet & Clank made their PlayStation 5 debut with Rift Apart, which is arguably still the greatest display of the hardware's power to date. Colors pop off the screen at each turn and particles flood the sky at every opportunity, especially when firing one of the many outrageous esoteric weapons the series and developer has become known for. The incredible visuals are augmented by Insomniac Games making full use of the PS5's 3D audio capabilities, the DualSense controller's haptics and adaptive triggers, and truly showcasing how the next-gen hardware's infinitesimal load times can take action platforming to a multiversal scale. Considering how much of a sensory overload Rift Apart was on a launch PS5, it's not a surprise to see Sony using it to test drive the upgraded PS5 Pro.
Can't anyone print instruction manuals anymore?
Before reinventing the Tetramino and Tetris effect, designer Tetsuya Mizuguchi had an idea that combined block-based puzzling with electronic music that could be played on the go. That idea became Luminous, one of the best puzzle games to ever grace the PSP. While solving its Tetris-like puzzles was what made it fun, the kicking soundtrack that synchronized its beat to the gameplay made it so that anyone who played Luminous felt like a third member of Daft Punk.
When does the operation begin?
Our intelligence within the FBI was not clear, but Romer's men are already inside the subway.
It's easy to write off Siphon Filter as a Metal Gear clone, especially when it was released just months after Kojima's PS1 masterpiece. But despite the similarities between these two stealth experiences, Siphon Filter is a brilliant espionage adventure in its own right, thanks to sharp gunplay, a story stuffed with twists, and missions that are just as varied as they are action-packed.
Now I will show you how I deal with informants.
Look at this place. It's amazing. So this is your world.
The PlayStation 3 library is loaded with gorgeous games, but Ni no Kuni: Wrath of the White Witch is the only one that comes close to feeling like a playable Studio Ghibli movie. Developed in collaboration with that legendary anime studio, Level 5 delivered a lavish RPG with a Pokemon-like monster collecting battle system that told an enrapturing story about a boy whisked away to a fantasy land to revive his recently deceased mother. While the stellar art direction shines moment to moment, it's the sequences produced by the animation studio that gave us Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away that truly make this one of the most visually arresting games on the PS3. Though the PS3 was lacking in top-tier RPGs for much of its lifetime, Wrath of the White Witch is one very notable exception. If all that wasn't enough, it also gave us the Welsh legend that is Mr. Drippy. Long live our short king.
You must be the one we fairies call the pure-hearted one.
Pro Evolution Soccer 6 is as good as football games have ever been. At a time when the rivalry between Pro Evo and FIFA was at an all-time high, Konami's Soccer Simulation was the sports game to play on PS2. It's the sort of standout opposition that EA sorely misses now, as with no strong competition, the genre is left to wallow in mediocrity. Oh, for those glory days to return. At the mere mention of the game, it's likely Patapon's infectious soundtrack is now playing in your head. If you were never hooked, Patapon was a PSP game that marched to the beat of its own drum, quite literally. Gameplay was a unique blend of rhythm and strategy because every note you hit, in this case a different beat to an actual drum, issued commands to a band of one-eyed warriors you led into battle. Each game had its charm, but Patapon 3 refined what made the first two games click while adding new features like multi-level dungeons, versus mode races, and battles.
Untamed, majestic, but lethal. If you hunt these wilds, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how clever, you will become the hunted.
Killzone developer Guerrilla Games took a big swing on the PS4, ditching its desaturated shooter series for the altogether much more vibrant world of Horizon Zero Dawn. Its rug-pulling sci-fi story is a solid backdrop for the introduction of a new PlayStation hero in the form of Aloy and her metal dinosaur decapitating archery combat. The Horizon series seems cursed with the first and second games launching in the same week as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, and even the first game's PS5 remaster shared a release date with Dragon Age The Veilguard. Still, Horizon has persevered against some very stiff competition, and Zero Dawn has already seen a PS5 sequel, VR experience, and LEGO game spawn for it, so something tells us we're going to be seeing a lot more of Aloy.
Crush our enemies and cast down those who lead us astray.
PlayStation isn't exactly the natural home of the first-person shooter, so not too many made this list, but it shouldn't come as a surprise that Doom Eternal is one of them. After the 2016 reboot ripped and tore the Doom franchise back into the mainstream after a 12-year hiatus, id Software's follow-up refined the experience in a way that made it feel like the shooter of tomorrow instead of the 7th sequel in a decades-old series.
The consequences of your actions here.
Welcome to SSX Tricky.
Go!
SSX Tricky proved stiff competition in the extreme sports market for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Barreling down perilous mountains and flipping around in every direction was fun in its own right, but it's Tricky's colorful style that made the otherwise snow-white vistas truly pop off the screen. The PS2's abundance of BMX, surfing, and skateboarding titles made for some tough foes to rock around, but SSX Tricky stuck the landing.
I am unbelievable!
2 times multiplier!
Sometimes it's so easy being me.
Long associated with the Game Boy, where Tetris was sold as a bundled game, Tetris Effect saw Rez mastermind Tetsuya Noguchi reimagine the Eternal puzzle game for the PlayStation VR headset. Themed around the psychological effect of the same name that occurs when playing the block stacker for long hours, Tetris Effect transformed the classic game into a psychedelic trip by combining the timeless Tetraminos with far-out visuals and a stellar soundtrack. A VR Tetris game could have been the most phone-in shovelware imaginable, but Tetris Effect elevated it to a practically religious experience. Mickey Mouse fused with Final Fantasy shouldn't work, but with Kingdom Hearts, Square Enix proved that it can.
Name's Goofy.
I'm Sora. I'll go with you guys.
However, it's in the sequel where the concept truly began to flourish. Sora, Goofy, and Donald and the whole gang embark on a convoluted adventure through beloved Disney worlds with particular highlights including the Steamboat Willie-inspired Timeless River level, Hercules' Olympus Coliseum, and Tron's Space Paranoids. Does it all make sense? That's a question for another day. We'll enjoy any game that lets us chat with Winnie the Pooh in between bashing enemies with a giant key though.
Okay! Guess it's about time to be moving on.
The Monster Hunter franchise is fondly remembered for its PSP legacy, which enabled millions of gamers, mostly in Japan, to spend hours hunting and gathering together in between work and school. But Monster Hunter World's arrival on PlayStation 4 marked a new age for the series and became the destination for millions of fans, new and old, from around the globe. With enormous monsters to take down and sprawling new areas to explore and even more players to join the hunt, Monster Hunter World takes the series' tried and true gameplay loop and makes everything much, much bigger. The original 1999 Medal of Honor, co-created by Steven Spielberg, was a true PlayStation classic. However, it's 2002's Medal of Honor Frontline on PS2 where the historical shooter series finally fulfilled its lofty ambitions of making Saving Private Ryan's most iconic scene playable. Opening on an intense recreation of the D-Day landings, Frontline's exciting and varied campaign would prove to be the blueprint for Call of Duty's later success.
We're placing you on a special mission. Good luck, Patterson.
It's hard to think of many games that are more perfectly suited to the PlayStation Vita than Hotline Miami, a top-down violence simulator that's fast, frantic, and relentless with murder. Hotline Miami's secret is its addictive simplicity, and even though it came to other platforms, its bite-sized levels and rapid restarts are perfectly suited to the Take-It-Everywhere PlayStation Vita. It's so good that it even featured as a cameo being played on the Vita no less, in one of PlayStation's biggest games ever, The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, they want to buckle up.
Killzone may have never proved to be Sony's Halo killer, but its industrial weight shooting and grimy aesthetic were instrumental in putting Horizon's developer Guerrilla on the map. Killzone 2 is particularly memorable for being a graphical showcase to a controversial degree. An early E3 demo may have been too good to be true, but the final game was nonetheless a stunning example of the cinematic visuals the PS3 was capable of. Square Enix's vision for remaking Final Fantasy VII became crystal clear with its second installment. Untethered from the need to set up the familiar events of Final Fantasy VII, Rebirth is able to throw our beloved heroes into a vibrant open world that brings to life what every gamer who played the original Final Fantasy VII was only able to imagine previously. Bursting at the seams with love for its iconic characters and world, Rebirth is an ambitious second act in this three-part remake that's already proving as essential as its blocky PS1 predecessor. The big question is, how long will we have to wait for the final installment?
But in reality, it's barely hanging on.
The words Ridge Racer are now best known for being shouted by an exuberant Kaz Hirai at E3 2006.
Ridge Racer! Remember that one? All right, so let me go right ahead.
But years before that, it was PlayStation's standout driving game. Type 4 hit a sweet spot between the sim trappings of Gran Turismo and the white-knuckle speed of Wipeout, carving out its own corner as one of the most popular games on the original Sony console.
Before Returnal, Housemarque was known for its exhilarating, but relatively niche, twin-stick shoot-'em-ups. Then, in 2021, Celine's time-looping sci-fi roguelike burst onto PS5s to showcase exactly what the console and the studio could do.
Encountered hostile player.
Its psychologically twisting story, excellent shooter gameplay, and stunning art design locked it in as one of the generation's must-play games, with bonus points for being one of the few PS5 games that really got creative with the DualSense's adaptive triggers.
Truth is, Tanner, 3 years on the department and you're still the best driver I got.
In the days of the original PlayStation, open-world driving games were limited to Grand Theft Auto's top-down perspective, and the thought of being able to navigate the streets at 60 miles per hour from a 3D viewpoint felt like a distant dream. But in 1999, Driver arrived on PlayStation to shatter those expectations, allowing players to become a wheelman in a video game like never before.
On the run, Miami. Tell me who he talks to, where he goes.
That is, of course, assuming you could actually get past its initial, notoriously difficult driving test, a fiendish barrier to entry before tearing up the streets of Miami and beyond. The hunt for a family-friendly PlayStation mascot is as old as the brand name itself. But it's fair to say that 2008's Little Big Planet delivered the hero the aughts were looking for with Sackboy. Little Big Planet was not only the birth of a mascot, though. It was also PlayStation's first significant experiment in user-generated content, giving players the tools to share their woolly, 2D creations with the world. Developer Media Molecule would unquestionably do it a whole lot better with sequels and spiritual successor, Dreams, but none of that happens without the whimsy, charm, and just plain adorableness of Little Big Planet. The Yakuza series, now known as Like a Dragon, has been a PlayStation staple since the first entry's release in 2005. Steadily growing over the years from a niche interest to a cult phenomenon. Our pick of the bunch is 2015's Yakuza 0, in part because its prequel status makes it an easy entry point for newcomers, but most importantly is because it has everything you'd want from one of Ryuga Gotoku Studios' crime epics. Over-the-top action, melodramatic Kiryu and Majima plotlines, and of course, life-consuming minigames, including a full cabaret club management sim. Between MTV's Pimp My Ride and Need for Speed Underground 2, it seemed like every car in the world in the early 2000s had tinted windows and underglow neon lighting. The PS2 was home to Need for Speed at its height, with Most Wanted's pink slip system and open-world police chases providing just as many thrills. But Underground 2 uses its nitrous oxide to just edge in front here thanks to its electric street racing drenched in glow-in-the-dark painted cool. PlayStation's recent history has been gilded with single-player success stories. As such, it was quite a surprise when Arrowhead Game Studios' co-op blaster, Helldivers 2, seemingly dropped out of nowhere to capture the democracy-obsessed minds of PS5 players everywhere. Building on the foundations of the arcadey top-down twin-stick shooter that launched on PS3, PS4, and Vita way back in 2015, Arrowhead's sequel expanded and augmented every aspect of the game, especially the Starship Troopers flavored brand of propaganda satire.
You will never destroy our way of life!
The end result was a delightful PvE experience that became a massive team effort, with players doing their part to tackle bug-like aliens and Terminator-esque cyborgs on multiple fronts. Legacy of Kain has emerged as one of PlayStation's favorite cult series over the years, and we think it peaked with 1999's Soul Reaver on the PS1. Crystal Dynamics introduced players to Vampire Ghost protagonist Raziel, whose supernatural abilities were put to the test with a combination of combat and puzzles that were equal parts stylish and challenging. It was incidentally the first game directed by Amy Hennig, who would then go on to help shape Naughty Dog into the modern PlayStation behemoth it is today. All of the aspects of what has become Sony's trademark single-player formula can be felt way back here in Soul Reaver.
What pitiful form is this that I have come to inhabit? Death would be a release next to this travesty.
Do you think I felt regret as I gazed upon the destruction we had wrought? Or at least humility at the speed with which a world can be transformed from a good world into a hell?
Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time's chronology warping mechanics were incredibly novel back in 2003, helping cement it as an instant PS2 classic and signaling return to popularity for a series that had been left in the 2D era. But while Sands of Time's supernatural approach formed the bedrock of a fantastic action-adventure, the game as a whole is more significant for being the foundation of Ubisoft's modern-day success. While Sands of Time received a number of direct follow-ups, ideas for a proposed Prince of Persia sequel would eventually morph into what would soon become Ubi's flagship series, Assassin's Creed.
Wait. I don't even know your name.
Just call me Kakolukia.
I'm Pete Kowalski, Jimmy Hopkins, and don't ask how I'm doing. I've been here 5 minutes and already people want me dead. Even my parents didn't hate me this quickly.
Bully comes from a time when Rockstar would dominate the PS2 on an annual basis, a far cry from the 7+ year waits we have now to suffer through. But while those long development cycles have their benefits, Jimmy Hopkins' misadventures through a year at Bulworth Academy are a prime example of when the GTA developer would take risks on smaller projects that offered unusual spins on the studio's trademark humor and larger-than-life characters.
Hit me with your best shot! Oh!
Rumors of a sequel have always persisted, and we certainly wouldn't say no to another term of classes after GTA 6 drops in 2045.
I said you could have fooled me. This place is full of bullies and maniacs.
Nonsense! That's just school spirit.
Katamari Damacy was the cool, artsy kids' favorite PlayStation 2 game. Before the need to roll up famous IP and turn them into AAA blockbuster games, the Prince of All Cosmos was rolling up everyday objects into a larger and larger ball and taking over the gaming world with it. Katamari Damacy is emblematic of the kind of madcap video game ideas that we don't really see from big studios these days, but were a regular blessing during the PS2 era. Thankfully, Katamari Damacy's legacy lives on in the quirky indie games developed by those same cool artsy kids who grew up playing it.
You must be the handyman who'll take any dirty job. Am I correct?
I only take special jobs, if you know what I mean.
The original Devil May Cry was an ice-cool breath of fresh air when it slashed its way onto the PS2 in 2001. Hideki Kamiya's wild combination of lightning-quick combat and demon-slaying story, conjured up out of 700-year-old Italian poetry, was originally planned as an entry into the Resident Evil series before Capcom realized it might have been a little too out there and just made it its own thing instead. One of history's most iconic action series, it effectively created the character action genre. The original DMC has spawned multiple sequels, but none have made as big of an impact as Dante's first outing.
Sword. Time to go to work, guys.
Look around you. This is your family.
One of the great gaming tragedies is that Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is likely Hideo Kojima's last Metal Gear game ever. But what a game to go out on. Though it was the series' first foray into an open world, The Phantom Pain integrated almost all the core mechanics from the previous games, refined into their most advanced, evolved iteration.
Fire!
Though The Phantom Pain's troubled development begins to show in its later missions, the moment-to-moment gameplay truly feels like the perfected final form of the tactical espionage action Kojima pioneered way back on the original PlayStation.
The only language left to me, revenge.
Soccer with cars? Possibly the most chocolate and peanut butter combination the games industry has seen since Mario with karts? Rocket League might not be the hit it is today without its success on PlayStation Plus. Rocket League is fun as hell, but it could have very well been slept on entirely if not for the huge influx of PS Plus subscribers who test drove it for free and presumably told their friends. While Rocket League arrived on the PS4 back in 2015, it gained and maintained enough momentum to attract the attention of Epic Games, who acquired developer Psyonix 4 years later, and it's still going strong today.
I'm a ghost. Actually, now I'm your ghost, and you? Well, you've been dead a long time.
After making its mark on Xbox with the Halo series, Bungie forged close ties with PlayStation for its ambitious MMO shooter, Destiny. While it may have been multi-platform, Destiny's timed exclusive content drops on PS4, including an all-important alpha test, made it feel like an exciting Sony experiment. The original Destiny is flawed, but it was the lab where Vault of Glass was born, the raid that set Bungie on the path towards both Destiny 2 and its wobbly multiplayer crown.
The darkness is coming back. We will not survive it this time.
Kick, punch, it's all in the mind. Those 7 words have lived rent-free in the heads of an entire generation of gamers for almost 3 decades. Parappa the Rapper was a huge part of PlayStation's push for experimentation in the PS1 era, and again, something we just don't see enough of these days from big publishers. He might have been a 2-hit wonder in terms of games, but Parappa's influence can't be overstated. The hip-hop hound pioneered the rhythm game genre, which Guitar Hero and Rock Band built on years later.
That's it for today.
You are Agent 47, the world's finest professional hitman.
Metal Gear Solid may be considered the definitive PlayStation stealth series, but IO Interactive's Hitman has a strong legacy dating back to the PS2 era. And hey, if we're paying more attention to Snake, maybe that means Agent 47 is actually stealthier. But either way, it deserves recognition. Now, we could have picked any of the Silent Assassin, Contracts, or Blood Money for this list, but instead we've opted for the much more recent World of Assassination, the now combined trilogy of games that acts as the culmination of over a decade of playful stealth mastery. IO's huge opportunity-filled levels act as immersive clockwork murder playgrounds. These scripted objectives always allow for amusingly creative kills, but it's the death scenarios you come up with yourself that always prove the most rewarding, and the gallows humor is always to die for.
Hidden in plain sight, you are the ultimate weapon.
I want food that don't make me sick. I want walls that hold back the wind. I want a decent life.
A PS4 launch game, Black Flag, showed how transformative the 8th generation of consoles could be for the Assassin's Creed series. Now, while the PS3 version was still able to render the huge, nearly seamless Caribbean map, the PS4 build did all that with much more detail, resulting in beautiful ocean waves and lush vegetation. Arguably the best Assassin's game to date, its ambitious land and sea open world laid the groundwork for the beloved Assassin's Creed Odyssey, while its environmental detail was echoed at smaller, denser scale in cult favorite Assassin's Creed Unity.
All things considered, I think it's turned out to be a rather fortuitous day, hasn't it?
What a pleasant surprise, brother.
Save it. You're no brother of mine.
Don't say you've forgotten me, Snake.
After the success of the first Metal Gear Solid, expectations for Hideo Kojima's PS2 follow-up were immense. But rather than merely give fans a better version of what they got in the first game, Kojima trusted his vision and gave us, well, something different. Though he made some divisive choices like sidelining hero Solid Snake in favor of newcomer Raiden, Kojima definitely delivered on bringing Metal Gear Solid to the next generation of PlayStation. The visual and mechanical improvements between the first and second game were the kind of massive leap we just don't see much anymore. And Metal Gear Solid 2 employed a number of systems and features that have since become commonplace in stealth action games. As for the story, say what you will, but there's no denying that Metal Gear Solid 2's commentary on the information age and AI was way ahead of its time and is shockingly relevant even today.
Legend. A legend is nothing but fiction. Someone tells it, someone else remembers, everybody passes it on.
The PS3 was the major starting point for online multiplayer on PlayStation. Now, while there are many examples of great PvP games from that generation, that game company's journey was easily the most innovative and whimsical way of showing how connections can form between players. A completely wordless adventure, players would encounter a mystery co-op partner, and despite the complete lack of communication, they would navigate Journey's ethereal world and uncover its quietly impactful story together, creating a singular and unforgettable shared experience. Back in 1996, an orange marsupial spun his way into our hearts when Crash Bandicoot arrived on the original PlayStation, courtesy of a little studio called Naughty Dog. Initially earmarked to be Sony's answer to Mario and Sonic, Crash has long since formed his very own identity of tomfoolery and Wumpa Fruit obsession. He can still be seen regularly smashing through crates and setting off TNT boxes to this very day. But even though the lovable Bandicoot has since appeared on the majority of video game platforms and is now technically the intellectual property of Microsoft, he's still unquestionably a PlayStation icon thanks to his explosive, shirtless debut on the PS1.
There must be thousands of them. We will face death and defend our home.
Ghost of Tsushima was the PS4's last big hurrah, and few consoles get to go out on such a high. Sucker Punch transported its open-world learnings from Infamous to feudal Japan in astonishing style. Perhaps the most purely cinematic of PlayStation's blockbusters, Ghost told the story of Jin Sakai's quest for vengeance. Though its superb sword combat was invigorating, the stunning scenery was as good a setting for relaxing as it was for revenge.
I'm ready, Uncle. We end this together.
Despite many considering it to be one of the best in the series, Final Fantasy IX is often overshadowed as a PlayStation classic by its older siblings. It also didn't help that it arrived right at the tail end of the console's lifespan, falling to the wayside when the PlayStation 2 and Final Fantasy X were on the horizon. But this welcome return to the series' original high fantasy storytelling demands your respect. A tale of political turmoil seen through the eyes of a thief called Zidane, its clever evolution of series staples and ability to tell multiple concurrent powerful stories truly places it shoulder to shoulder with the genre's giants. It's arguably one of the strongest RPGs for the original PlayStation, and without question, the console's last big hurrah.
Does it feel, Wayne, to stand on the very stones that ran with your parents' blood?
2009's Batman Arkham Asylum was a surprise hit with its intricate Metroidvania action, but it was Rocksteady's follow-up that truly blew the doors wide apart as we were unleashed to an open-world Gotham.
Why do you work alone, Batman?
The most notorious rogues gallery to grace the PS3 clashes with the Caped Crusader as he races against time to save the city from a thrilling plot that has you second-guessing at every turn.
You cannot stop me. Soon I will command forces beyond your comprehension.
Throw in an evolution of one of the most influential melee combat systems designed in recent memory, and you've got a fully fledged superhero fantasy.
But you of all people should know, there's plenty wrong with me.
Vagrant Story is a fantastic RPG with a finely tuned battle system and interesting puzzles, but it's best remembered for exploring new depths in video game storytelling. Square had already enjoyed an incredible run of genre-defining RPGs on the original PlayStation, but Vagrant Story's adventure through Valindia captured the hearts and minds of anyone who walked in the shoes of Ashley Riot, our hero who is accused of a murder they didn't commit. Perhaps the biggest crime of all, though, is that we never got a sequel.
Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is the culmination of Insomniac's web-slinging work so far, taking the best bits of both Peter Parker's and Miles Morales' games to create an amazing and truly sensational adventure. With silky smooth swinging across a stunning New York City, a twisting comic book storyline, and exciting melee combat, it is yet another in a long line of highly polished releases from a studio that can consider itself among PlayStation's most prolific.
Wasn't this city empty not too long ago?
Do you enjoy crying? Well, maybe we could interest you in a trip across the zombie apocalypse with Lee and Clementine in Telltale's The Walking Dead. Season 1 of this episodic choose-your-own-adventure saw the studio working at the peak of its powers as agonizing decision after agonizing decision was placed in front of us on the PS3. A tonally faithful expansion of the post-apocalypse introduced in Robert Kirkman's seminal graphic novel series, Telltale's Spin reinvigorated the adventure genre in 2012 and is to this day probably the most upsetting video game that involves cel-shaded zombies.
Hey, take it easy, amigo. No es nada, no es nada.
I left you pouring your heart out into the gutter.
It is hard to even articulate how hugely influential Grand Theft Auto 3 was on video games as a medium. Without Rockstar's original satire of New York City, the open-world genre today simply wouldn't exist. GTA 3 catapulted the previously top-down Grand Theft Auto series into a 3D world that felt genuinely alive, its streets packed with unforgettable characters and underpinned by a mob movie-inspired narrative that was as funny as it was compelling. Throw in an unparalleled level of freedom, allowing players to tackle missions in different orders and different ways, plus the ability to steal any car you saw, and GTA 3's Liberty City started a legacy that is still going strong over 20 years later. As part of the burgeoning relationship between Final Fantasy and PlayStation, series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi conceived of a tactical spin-off for Final Fantasy, combining his beloved role-playing series with a more strategic genre he loved. The result was Final Fantasy Tactics, a beautiful and thoughtful tactical RPG for sure, but it also introduced the world of Ivalice, the land which would go on to become the setting for games like Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy XII. A grimy fantasy dungeon delver thick with mystery and lore, Demon's Soul's place in the halls of PlayStation history is secure thanks to being the starting point of From Software's modern legacy. It was the journey where we first rested at bonfires to restore our health, summoned unknown strangers to aid us in difficult boss battles, and fought tooth and nail to retrieve our lost souls. Demon's Souls laid the foundation for bigger and better games, but that shouldn't detract from its own achievements, particularly its evocative environmental design. Thankfully, it's all been painstakingly restored and handsomely preserved in Bluepoint's fantastic PS5 remake. The PS2 era God of War was a completely different proposition to its character-focused modern reinvention, but what 2007's God of War 2 may have lacked in nuance, it made up for in scale, ferocity, and excess. Chaining together combos with the Blades of Olympus never felt so good as ancient Greece's gods fell at Kratos' sandaled feet. Initially created as a Western answer to a genre popularized by Japanese developers, with this sequel, God of War secured its place in the pantheon of great character action games. Chrono Trigger is widely regarded as one of the greatest RPGs ever made, but its sequel is equally deserving of praise. Rather than simply rehash ideas, Chrono Cross mixes everything up to huge success. Firstly, it's set in an entirely different world with new characters to bond with and stories to discover, but more importantly, its battle system is completely overhauled, mixing real-time and turn-based strategy to create one of the deepest, most fulfilling RPG experiences of its time. The beauty of Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker is how Hideo Kojima really emphasized the portable in PlayStation Portable. Taking the stealth action gameplay the series is known for, Peace Walker delivered bite-sized missions for Big Boss to take on that could be finished in a single commute to work or school. Not only that, but the big story implications set up in Peace Walker makes this PSP outing a genuinely important part of the Metal Gear storyline. Picking a favorite Guitar Hero game is difficult because ultimately it comes down to which era-spanning setlist of rock songs you most preferred to pretend you were performing in front of 20,000 people. Sure, Guitar Hero 2 had War Pigs and Freebird, but 3 had a killer edition that would become synonymous with the series, Dragon Force's Through the Fire and Flames. It's impossible to overstate just how much of a phenomenon Guitar Hero and its competitor Rock Band were during the PS3 era, but just take a look at how many played-to-death plastic guitars you'll find at your local landfill, and you'll get a pretty good idea. Go on, head over to the dump, I'll wait. Few games define the original PlayStation's cultural identity as perfectly as Wipeout. Its futuristic, heavily stylized aesthetic and techno soundtrack were the epitome of Sony's vision for PlayStation being a lifestyle rather than just another games console. But beneath the slick visuals was a blisteringly fast racing game that, thanks to its anti-gravity vehicles, felt completely different from anything that had come before. And everything that made the original Wipeout great is on full display in its successor, Wipeout 2097.
You go after them! I'll hold them off here! Hey!
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thanks.
When it comes to the history of console multiplayer, Tales of GoldenEye on N64 and Halo on Xbox dominate the split-screen conversation, but PlayStation 2 had its own FPS king that deserves just as much respect, Time Splitters 2. This was the essential PS2 shooter and almost certainly the reason anyone owned the 4-player multi-tap peripheral. Its arcade mode provided match after match of exciting showdowns, made all the more thrilling and esoteric by the maps and the weapons that were pulled from a whole host of different time periods and genres. The original Titanfall was an Xbox exclusive without a campaign. When its sequel arrived on the PS4 with one of the finest set of first-person shooter single-player missions ever constructed, the series' full potential was finally realized. Toss in an exhilarating and criminally underplayed multiplayer mode to the mix, and Titanfall 2 is not just one of the best shooters to appear on a PlayStation console, but one of the best FPS games of all time. And of course, because we can't have nice things, we're still waiting on Titanfall 3.
What are you doing?
Trust me.
Look, Sonny, we were set up. The deal was an ambush.
After an 11-year and counting wait for Grand Theft Auto 6 to arrive, the thought of a Grand Theft Auto sequel coming only 1 year after its predecessor is unimaginable. But it happened back in 2002 with fan favorite Grand Theft Auto Vice City promptly arriving 12 months after GTA 3. And it wasn't a quick and dirty spin-off either, or a half-baked expansion pack. Vice City was a triumph that took everything its predecessor had to offer and improved it. The characters were better, the storytelling stronger, and the decision to create an 80s set ode to Scarface set in a fictionalized Miami was inspired, opening the doors for an incredible soundtrack and exciting visual flair. Grand Theft Auto 3 may have laid the foundation, but Vice City coated it with irresistible style and a whole lot of neon.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea.
It may have taken nearly 30 years, but Sony finally made a mascot platformer to rival the likes of Nintendo's Mario. It's the most recent game on this list, but it's there for a reason. Astrobot is a consistently inventive joyride through PlayStation history, paying homage to dozens of other games on this list. Even if you don't have 5 console generations worth of nostalgia for PlayStation, it's a joyful audiovisual showcase that fully embraces the quirks of the PS5's DualSense controller. Instantly one of the console's best games, its legacy will surely only grow over time. There would be no Uncharted without Tomb Raider. In fact, it's hard to imagine what action-adventure games would look like without Lara Croft's first outing. Hitting the PlayStation in 1996, it's often considered the first game to approach storytelling in a truly cinematic manner, an outlook Sony would adopt for decades to come. It may be a little unwieldy to play at this point in time, but there's no denying the original Tomb Raider's impact.
So, are you ready to seek your fortune?
Speaking of Uncharted, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End saw Nathan Drake contending with the prospect of retirement, attempting and then failing miserably to resist the call of adventure. An odyssey into not just the darkest dungeons, but also the minds and fraying relationships of its lead characters, Uncharted 4 was as human as Drake has ever appeared, and a reflection of the evolution of Naughty Dog as a studio. That didn't stop it from doing what the series is best known for, though, delivering blockbuster bursts of action. The Madagascar chase sequence still reigns as one of the most dynamic sequences ever experienced through a DualShock controller. This bittersweet closing chapter serves as the perfect ending for one of PlayStation's most beloved series, at least for now.
Is that all you've got, little android?
In order to fully uncover the secrets of the wild ride that is 2017's Nier Automata, you'll need to play through it 3 times. That would seem like a chore for most games, but Platinum Games' one-of-a-kind exercise in narrative structure makes that journey thrilling from start to finish. Tasked with saving a post-war planet from machine forces, it's as dynamic as it is compelling, packed start to finish with varied gameplay approaches that range from third-person hack-and-slash action to top-down bullet-hell battles. It's exactly the sort of exciting experiment synonymous with the PS1 era, making Nier Automata a perfect fit for this list.
It was an honor to fight with you. Truly.
Crash, bang, wallop. Criterion's Burnout 3 Takedown looked at what Polyphony was doing with simulation racing in Gran Turismo and took things as far to the other side of the spectrum as possible. With just as much emphasis placed on ramming into your rivals as speeding past them, driving games have rarely been as fun as they were in Takedown on the PS2. And that's without even mentioning Crash Mode, an all-timer of a mode designed around creating the biggest wrecks possible.
You cover your face, but I know who you are. Emily Caldwin.
If clockwork-like intricacy and artistic elegance is what you're searching for in a game, then look no further than Arcane's beautiful supernatural assassin sim, Dishonored 2. This PlayStation-friendly gateway to the player-driven ideals of early 2000s PC gaming is packed with wickedly smart level design in which targets can be attacked and approached in any way you see fit. Going stealthy or stabby is just the first choice, and Dishonored 2's world reacts appropriately to every single decision you make while playing. There's a reason why Clover Studio is remembered so fondly even decades after it was disbanded. The Capcom subsidiary behind games like Beautiful Joe and God Hand created some of the most wildly creative and beautiful games for the PlayStation. But none of its titles are quite so beloved as Okami. The cel-shaded art style that renders mythological Japan will be forever beautiful, and the iconic paintbrush mechanic that brings brushstrokes to life still feels like pure magic. We miss you every day, Clover Studio. Although Tony Hawk's Pro Skater made an important mark on PlayStation, it's the sequel that took the series to the next level, birthing the generation of extreme sports video games that followed. Where Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 excels is its ability to push beyond being an excellent sports game. It established a reasonably complex formula of combos, puzzles, and collectibles, all wrapped up within a 2-minute time constraint. It demands to be endlessly replayed, and when you're doing that in some of the most iconic locations ever committed to a sports game, it's hard to resist. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 vitally helped extend the combo by adding in the frankly essential manual system, incorporating some vastly improved level design, and including one of the most iconic game soundtracks, all of which helped cement its legacy as an extremely good extreme sports game.
Listen to my story. This may be our last chance.
Final Fantasy X is perhaps the best example of how the PS2's DVD drive revolutionized console gaming. Thanks to the disc's vastly higher storage capacity, Final Fantasy X was able to be both the first full 3D and fully voiced game in the series, resulting in an experience notably more cinematic than its PS1 predecessors. Combined with dozens of beautifully rendered cutscenes, Final Fantasy X's story is granted an enhanced level of emotion and intimacy, a vital thing considering the romance between characters Titus and Yuna that acts as the game's soulful heart. This, along with rock-solid turn-based combat and a bright, fascinating world, makes Titus's journey arguably the last truly essential Final Fantasy game. And that's no laughing matter. It's no surprise Nintendo was the dominant console for JRPGs during the early 90s, but when PlayStation launched, the landscape changed dramatically. This was in part due to Square's Final Fantasy and Chrono series coming to Sony's console, but also Konami's beloved Suikoden games. Their storytelling, especially in Suikoden 2, was a notable highlight, filled with depth, emotion, and characters so wonderfully realized you couldn't help but fall in love with them. It's those connections that make Suikoden 2 as fondly remembered today as it was 25 years ago.
What is this? Wow, what a mansion!
It's hard to imagine what video game horror would look like without the arrival of Resident Evil. The first in the long-running and extremely successful series debuted on PlayStation in 1996, letting players explore the zombie-infested, puzzle-filled Spencer Mansion. Although primitive by today's standards, Resident Evil set the mold for everything that followed: the isolation, the limited resources, the relentless sense of dread, and, of course, the jump scares. The formula has been regularly improved upon, and the original is arguably weaker than most of its sequels, but none of Raccoon City's later highs would have been possible without the progenitor. Its importance to the genre and PlayStation is unquestionable.
No one wants to admit it, but humanity is under attack.
Mass Effect 2's achievements are well known. With its S-tier companions, an unrivaled sense of urgency in its story, and reactive decision-making, it's BioWare's finest hour. Less documented, though, is Mass Effect 2's journey to PlayStation, during which the series broke free from the shackles of Microsoft exclusivity a year after the game's launch on Xbox 360. PS3 players were asked to jump into the middle chapter of a trilogy without having played its predecessor, using an interactive comic to catch up on the story. It was an awkward transition, but one players happily endured in order to play one of the best RPGs ever made. Both Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat dominated the fighting game space in the 90s, but neither was synonymous with the PlayStation brand in quite the same way as Tekken, the new up-and-comer that, along with Virtua Fighter, established and cemented the 3D fighter. There are many contenders for the best Tekken game on PlayStation, and we'd especially like to shout out PlayStation 2's launch game, Tekken Tag Tournament, but for our money, Tekken 3, the first outing for legendary characters like Jin Kazama and Eddie Gordo, will always stand tall as the true king of the Iron Fist tournament.
Round 1, fight!
Well, I recognize that dour expression anywhere.
It was no easy task for Sony Santa Monica to follow up its 2018 Norse masterpiece, but with God of War Ragnarok, it succeeded to almighty effect. While not telling as tight a story, the sprawling PS5 sequel evolved Kratos' bone-crushing combat even further, adding a creative new weapon to his arsenal that reflected his past life in a poignant yet delightfully brutal manner. Dealing with everything from familial friction to the literal end of the world, the ambition on show is staggering, making it all the more impressive that it pulled it off and remains one of this generation's finest games. Just take a quick glance at one of its eye-catching menus or listen to 5 seconds of its acid jazz soundtrack and you'll quickly realize that no PlayStation game possesses more style than Persona 5 Royal. A 100-hour roller coaster ride through modern Tokyo and its darker parallel metaverse, the Royal version enhances the original Persona 5 by adding an extra chapter and gameplay tweaks to an already stellar RPG. It's a flashy, fun foray into the hearts of the worst people encountered by the Phantom Thieves, a group of teenagers pulling off Inception-like heists using monsters pocketed along the way. Your gang of heroes must do all that while also managing the delicate bonds created in its high school setting. Incredibly exciting from start to finish, it cemented Atlas as one of the all-time great RPG studios.
Such is the code of the Phantom Thieves.
The gallant knight protects the princess fair.
Remake Resident Evil 2? Sure, why not? Resident Evil 3? Haven't seen that one for a while, but remaking Resident Evil 4, doesn't that feel too soon? Isn't Resident Evil 4 already perfect? Well, it turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks. Capcom decided to tackle the seemingly impossible task of remaking one of the greatest video games of all time. Rather than a beat-for-beat remake, Capcom took some ingenious liberties with RE4, doubling down on the horror and losing some of the campier elements of the original. It still strikes that perfect balance between scares and action, but the PlayStation 2 horror classic may just have been usurped with its newest edition.
This is kind of fun!
Oh, here we go again.
Another Grand Theft Auto entry finds its way onto this list. GTA San Andreas displayed a new level of ambition from Rockstar as it looked to evolve the open world series in the PS2's twilight years. A mammoth-sized map for the mid-2000s included 3 entire cities and miles of countryside in between, with every square inch of it acting as a playground for CJ Johnson as he navigated the gang warfare and police corruption plaguing his home state.
You haven't forgotten about us, have you, boy?
Hell no, Officer Tenpenny. I was just wondering what took y'all so long.
Experimenting with new life sim-esque mechanics and a satirization of more mature topics, amongst the GIMP costumes and comical dildo fights, it signaled the direction that Rockstar would take as it moved into the HD generation.
Drive by.
These next tests require cooperation. Consequently, they have never been solved by a human. That's where you come in.
Tucked away in 2007's Orange Box bundle was a small-scale interdimensional puzzle game called Portal. It was fun, created a few memes, had a great song, and a story, right? Well, for Portal 2, developer Valve decided a fun distraction wasn't enough. Along with a much more comprehensive story and more ingenious puzzles for the sequel, Valve doubled down on the fun with one of the best co-op modes ever made for a puzzle game, or any game for that matter.
Don't disappoint me.
Call of Duty's first venture into a contemporary setting couldn't have gone much better. A memorable, globe-trotting campaign packed with instant classic missions such as All Gillied Up, combined with a multiplayer suite of maps and an online progression system that would go on to define a generation of shooters, Modern Warfare changed the game when it burst onto the PS3 in 2007. Silent Hill was always the David Lynch to Resident Evil's George Romero. The PlayStation's other iconic horror franchise prided itself on taking pure horror gaming as far as it could go, and with Silent Hill 2, Konami created an unrelenting nightmare of a game. Everything about Silent Hill 2, from its creatures to horrible locations, was meant to fill you with overwhelming dread. Forget power fantasy, this is the game that forces you to take several deep breaths and calm your nerves before you push open the doors to some new, horrifying location.
Get the hell out of here! Leave me alone already!
Demon's Souls may have been the first flame for From Software's rise, but Dark Souls was where it truly set the bonfire ablaze. While the two share many similarities, Dark Souls left the level-like structure of its predecessor behind in favor of a fully interconnected world. The result is a physical place that's as mysterious and surprising as its deep and naughty backstory, and just as difficult to work through. Foes like Ornstein and Smo are still spoken about in hallowed tones. Now, FromSoft has since made better games, but it's hard to argue against Dark Souls being the studio's most significant achievement.
It's easy to forget just how huge the Gran Turismo series is. The third game, Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec, was the best-selling exclusive on the best-selling console of all time, with over 14 million copies sold. The PS2 racing sim blew people away at the time with unmatched graphical power, attention to detail, and authentic car handling. What could so easily be an overwhelming experience for those used to the arcade rough and tumble of Need for Speed, Gran Turismo 3 managed to lure in even the most casual of fans thanks to its intelligently designed progression system that ranged from fun test track challenges to concentration testing and multi-hour endurance races. In an era when driving games were all the rage, A-Spec created an unmatched legacy, coming out on top as the best of the bunch. Persona 4 Golden was, for many in the West, their first exposure to the beloved JRPG series. An enhanced version of the 2008 original, first seen on the PS2, Persona 4 Golden managed to successfully balance the series' trademark tone of high school antics with darker issues that plague our world, all while going on the hunt for a serial killer plaguing a rural Japanese town. The elemental rock, paper, scissors inspired turn-based combat was a fantastic stepping stone from the likes of Pokemon into a realm of more mature RPGs, which was brought to life with an unforgettable cast of characters. That, coupled with an earworm of a soundtrack and a distinct visual style, make Persona 4 Golden hands down the best game released for the PlayStation Vita. Sony's high-powered handheld might not have been a commercial hit, but it did introduce many to the Persona series, and for that, it deserves all the praise in the world. Few games have had as much of an impact on RPG design as The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. CD Projekt Red's landmark fantasy epic practically reinvents the side quests, transforming optional adventures from extracurricular busywork into complex, twisty narratives that were as deep and essential as any main chapter. Geralt's side hustles add a unique richness to the overarching story, coloring between the grimy lines as each tale overlaps and intertwines, making the game's famous choices and their often devastating consequences all the more powerful. You really do feel the world and its people move with each decision you make. The Witcher 3 is unquestionably the greatest RPG in the PS4 library, but its position as such is such a fascinating indicator of change. PlayStation's RPG history is primarily a Japanese story told by the likes of Squaresoft and Konami, but the 2010s saw more and more traditionally PC-focused Western developers bringing their RPGs to console. The fact that Wild Hunt, the final chapter in a PC game trilogy, was able to prove such a massive success on PlayStation is a testament to its revolutionary roleplay design. It's hard to think of a game more ahead of its time than Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Reframing the espionage action series as a 60s set, James Bond-style, behind enemy lines mission, its intricate stealth and camouflage systems, bold cinematic flourishes, and unmatched boss design make its release on the PS2 seem like a miracle for 2004. Naked Snake's journey through the Soviet jungle manages to balance moments of genuine emotional weight, best showcased by his final showdown with former mentor, the boss, with points of frivolity and experimentation, an indulgent theme song, crocodile headwear, and of course, a famously long ladder sequence, just to name a few. However, it's in those game-changing boss designs that Snake Eater truly shines. The multiple ingenious ways you can take down Elderly Sniper the End, the thrilling Shagahad chase and Volgan showdown, and of course, the stunning surroundings of that aforementioned encounter with the boss. Snake Eater was a masterpiece at the time of its release and remains one to this day. So it's quite a relief that the upcoming remake is barely changing a thing about it. The Castlevania series has always provided fun, side-scrolling action games, but with Symphony of the Night, it was no longer just a game where you ran from left to right. The game's setting of Dracula's castle is instead one open-ended map for protagonist Alucard to freely explore, with all four directions demanding equal attention. While heavily inspired by Super Metroid, Symphony of the Night made its own important contributions to a genre it would go on to co-headline. From the shifting map to adding RPG-like experiences, conquering this giant puzzle of a map as it twists and turns throughout the story immediately puts into perspective just what a monumental accomplishment Symphony of the Night turned out to be.
I'll guide you to meet your destiny!
As PlayStation entered the 3D era, Symphony of the Night arrived in the darkness as a true swan song to 2D gaming and the triumphant start of the Metroidvania genre. Praise be to Koji Igarashi. The biggest surprise in Elden Ring might just be how similar it is to past From Software games. But don't let the time-tested combat and epic boss battles fool you. Elden Ring is a monumental achievement and a true evolution that rose from the primordial RPG soup Demon's Souls served up on PS3. Every corner of its massive open world holds some kind of new secret, boss fight, or dungeon, and the freedom it extends to players feels downright radical compared to other open world RPGs.
Must extinguish thy flame.
While some games have a fear that players might get lost without some sort of invisible guidance, Elden Ring provides players with a few specks of light to point them in the approximate right direction, but otherwise lets them loose onto its magnificent playground. Pick a direction, encounter a boss fight that's too hard, change directions, and then you find an even harder boss. It's great.
Violent, sad, scary, and irrepressibly grim, The Last of Us Part 2 isn't best described as a fun time, but it is a phenomenally powerful one. 2020's Ellie-led sequel to one of the most recognizable games of all time took us to the rainy, overgrown streets of Seattle on a trip that spirals through all 7 layers of hell. Naughty Dog's most intricate combat system to date delivers fast and energetic stealth combat that's far superior to its comparatively clunky predecessor. Infected and humans alike are dispatched with difficult-to-watch ferocity. Ellie has had to grow up a lot in the time between this and the PS3 original, and both the gameplay and story brutally reflect the harsh realities of her world. But it's the introduction of Abby that is Part 2's masterstroke. Her perspective into this post-apocalyptic America is initially jarring, but it proves to be a prime example of how to play with split narratives in the medium. You may not enjoy the outcome. This isn't a story that presents good and bad as a clearly defined concept, but it's a wholly ambitious swing from a studio that's willing to push the borders on what is expected from a video game. There are many contenders for the best entry in the Resident Evil series, but our vote emphatically goes to the 2019 remake of Resident Evil 2. The original Resident Evil 2 took everything successful about the survival horror formula established by its older sibling and refined it. The locations were creepier, the enemies more menacing, and the scares were bigger and badder.
The hell is that?
The adventures of Leon and Claire in Raccoon City not only became a benchmark for Resident Evil, but also set the standard for a PlayStation blockbuster. But in every way that 1998's Resident Evil 2 improved on its predecessor, the remake also replicated in kind. It's a prime example of how to take an older game and reanimate it for a new generation of players. Pioneering a new generation of scares that are often imitated but rarely equaled, Resident Evil 2 sits atop the pile when it comes to one of PlayStation's most famous series.
The future of Baldur's Gate hangs in the balance. Will you be the hero and save it from looming darkness?
Perhaps it's bold of us to put Baldur's Gate 3 in the top 10. With its complex character menus and fiddly inventory screens, Larian's Dungeons & Dragons adventure is clearly a dyed-in-the-wool PC game. But there's no getting away from the simple fact that while Baldur's Gate 3 is far from a classic PlayStation game, it is undoubtedly one of the very best games you can play on Sony's current machine. A monumental achievement in RPG design, Baldur's Gate's world reacts to your every single decision, be that something as simple as a little white lie, or as devilishly grand as slaughtering an entire population,
or sow chaos in your wake.
The physical and emotional impact of those choices can be felt across the entire journey, shaping the character arcs of your companions and adjusting the trajectory of the epic finale. And by painstakingly translating the D&D rulebook into video form, Larian ensures battle is just as malleable as its storylines. Dozens and dozens of skills, abilities, and weapon options means you can mold each character into the warrior of your choosing and devise creative strategies to decimate your foes. Few experiences feel as bespoke to you as Baldur's Gate 3, and that's why this traditionally PC experience deserves to live alongside PlayStation's heavy hitters. Beyond all the crime cinema homages and wanton violence, the Grand Theft Auto series has been an exercise in perfecting the urban open world. Rockstar finally nailed it with GTA 5's Los Santos, a digital city that feels authentically alive. In the campaign, the street's heartbeat comes courtesy of the series' most accomplished mission chain, which combines the character study narrative of GTA 4 with the wild objective variety of San Andreas. The ambitious character switching mechanic gels perfectly with the story's heist focus, pivoting the action between the team's specializations as each job demands. But As good as the campaign is, it's GTA 5's multiplayer mode that captured the imagination of millions. Taken online, Los Santos becomes a crime playground where it's the purge every day. Superficially, GTA Online is a collection of PvP modes with a constant trickle of seasonal content. To the people who walk its streets, though, it's a community stomping ground where friendships are forged, rivalries sparked, and dominance achieved. Multiplayer heists provide a taste of that Rockstar single-player storytelling magic, but it's the emergent tales spun by players that make GTA Online an enduring favorite. It's not hyperbole to say that Uncharted 2 Among Thieves charted the course for the next 15 years of PlayStation history. Its predecessor built solid, if unspectacular, foundations, but it's in Nathan Drake's Himalayan adventure that he really found his footing. It's ironic in some ways, then, that it took him hanging off the end of a derailed mountainside train for him to do that. For many, Among Thieves remains the apex of the Uncharted series, although just as many would argue in favor of A Thief's End, but there's no doubt that 2 is the most impactful. Its explosive dedication to delivering blockbuster cinematic action would spark a fire inside Sony to make single-player stories like this their focus for a decade and a half to come. Naughty Dog's PS3 legacy can be seen in everything from God of War to Ghost of Tsushima to Horizon Zero Dawn. Arguably PlayStation's most important studio, the real strength of Naughty Dog's achievements began here with Uncharted 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a robbery.
Sons of Dutch. Makes us brothers.
The highest ranking multi-platform game on our list, Red Dead Redemption 2 saw Rockstar hit its greatest creative heights following a chain of success that had been tied to the PlayStation since the PS2. Offering unparalleled immersion into the American West at the turn of the 20th century, the fateful tale of Arthur Morgan is arguably still the best looking game on a PlayStation console, despite having been released on a past generation's hardware in 2018. But Red Dead Redemption 2 is so much more than just a technical achievement. It is an open-world developer firing on all cylinders, inviting you to get lost in its land full of quirky characters, genuinely worthwhile side activities, and of course, an impeccably told story.
Only the feeblest of men take jobs in the government.
With the devilishly charismatic Dutch Vanderland operating as his foil, Arthur steals the hearts of any who controls him, making us cherish each and every moment spent walking in his shoes. A world-weary man with a violent past looking to usher in a brighter future for those close to him, he's brilliantly reflective of the time and place he lives in. Managing to tell such an engaging and affecting tale in as huge an open-world setting as this is an art form in its own right, and through Red Dead Redemption 2, Rockstar showed us why it's the master of its craft.
Stay with me.
You have to love yourself apart.
In comparison to the new and exciting remake project, the original Final Fantasy VII looks a little quaint. The winds of time and technological progress will do that. But this landmark Japanese RPG was a game changer for Sony. Not only did it see the developer Squaresoft defect from Nintendo in order to use the power of the PlayStation to create the first ever 3D Final Fantasy, it also communicated that Sony's console could deliver much more than just arcade and sports games on your TV. Final Fantasy VII showed everyone that PlayStation was the new home of epic adventures delivered on multiple discs. Those achievements may be a thing of the past now, but Final Fantasy VII's legacy endures because of the elements that refuse to age. Its cast of detailed, emotionally driven characters develop over the course of a journey that balances personal stakes against the backdrop of a looming apocalypse. Similar balance is found in tone. This is a game with weight and heft that thrives on idiosyncrasies a variety of bizarre enemies, comedic minigames, and absurdly sized swords. It's this combination of light and dark that make Final Fantasy VII such an enduring classic.
You have no idea what loss is.
Naughty Dog's games have always been a sign of changing times for PlayStation, shifting from mascot platformers to action games to cinematic adventures. The Last of Us is the shining example of that latter phase, a game that took the interactive movie ambitions of Uncharted and grounded them in a compelling character drama. Exploring the surrogate father-daughter relationship between Joel and Ellie, the increasingly distressing circumstances of the post-apocalypse setting help drill deep into raw emotions and personality flaws. The script, elevated to classic status thanks to performances by Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, is smaller scale and less ambitious than its sequel, but has proven more enduring in the minds of gamers thanks to its focus on the relationship between its central duo. Many of its achievements are admittedly found in its movie-grade cutscenes, but The Last of Us wouldn't rank so highly on this list if it weren't for the way Naughty Dog entwined its narrative and gameplay goals. The survival horror-inspired gameplay communicates a sense of desperation, be that in the constant search for supplies, DIY equipment, or the messy struggle that is Melee. While Ellie is technically invulnerable to damage, combat triggers a guardian-like rage inside of you, a feeling that pays off to tremendous effect when it comes to the muddy morality behind its final act.
Joel, I can handle myself.
It's called luck, and it is gonna run out.
Taking down giant bosses in a fantasy world is meant to be fun. And yes, there's a certain amount of glowing satisfaction to be found in clambering up one of Shadow of the Colossus's many skyscraper-sized creatures. But it's the distressing emotive response that's triggered by plunging Wander's blade into the creature's weak spots that makes Team Ico's masterpiece so special. As black liquid spurts into the sky and the monster's dying breaths chase you, it's not joy but sadness that sweeps the screen. Conquering the Colossi is pretty much melancholia defined. Team Ico's second fantasy world is sparse yet haunting, largely empty apart from the hulking figures that call its green fields, treacherous deserts, and vast lakes home. Each one is a delicate puzzle waiting to be unlocked, the battles proving to be enigmas that demand the use of brain over brawn. This artistic, poetic approach creates a singular piece of work only enhanced by the stunning PS4 remake that arrived 13 years after the original first lumbered onto the PS2. You may have some regrets following your in-game actions in Shadow of the Colossus, but you'll certainly be left with none about experiencing it. At first glance, Bloodborne is another great Souls-like RPG from the studio that created the genre. But look a little deeper and you'll find something truly sinister running through its veins. Yes, the boss fights are supreme and the level design is tremendous, but there are dark and old secrets hidden all throughout Bloodborne. The way the game unravels such secrets for the player is the true majesty of From Software's PlayStation 4 magnum opus. This isn't just a game with hidden treasure chests behind disappearing walls. Taking direct inspiration from author H.P. Lovecraft, From Software took the concepts of arcane knowledge and eldritch horror and translated them beautifully into video game form. Parts of Bloodborne don't even reveal themselves to the player until they gain a certain amount of insight, which can only be revealed from encountering Bloodborne's most horrifying and beautiful sights. Bloodborne isn't just action RPG greatness, it's pure interactive literature.
He doesn't know, does he?
about your true nature? Or his own?
The peak of modern PlayStation, 2018's God of War is the quintessential cinematic blockbuster that defines Sony's first-party pedigree. Santa Monica Studios' masterpiece acts as not just the reinvention of a series, but also the reinvention of a beloved character.
Slow down. Your haste will cost us.
It takes Kratos on a journey as heart-wrenching as it is head-splitting. The combat is fierce and the performance is nuanced, something perfectly exemplified in the unforgettable sequence when the exiled Spartan recovers his long-buried blades, a moment that draws you in emotionally before bursting into a fiery frenzy of violence. It's all elegantly woven into a tale that tells a profoundly human story in its beautiful God-filled mythological world, all anchored by a seamless, never-cutting camera that makes sure you never miss a beat. A monumental achievement in both narrative construction and game design, it's PlayStation's best game of this century.
Can't be. You were killed in Zanzibar.
The word PlayStation has become synonymous with a very particular kind of game, a single-player blockbuster that deftly weaves together cinematic storytelling with smart, accessible gameplay mechanics. While that reputation was truly solidified during the PS3 era, its roots go right back to 1998 and the original PlayStation's most enduring masterpiece, Metal Gear Solid. Director Hideo Kojima brought his cinema obsession to the console through a dramatic espionage story that frequently sacrificed playtime in order to examine its characters through lengthy, well-performed dialogue sequences.
But it looks like our little diversion got their attention. Now's your best chance to slip in unnoticed.
Despite its playful, oftentimes meta tone, Metal Gear Solid explores the theoretical real-world consequences of nuclear aggression with genuine insight, delving into subjects that remain as essential today as they did in the late 90s. Between the codec calls, though, are Metal Gear Solid's strongest achievements. We can't forget its all-important Vision Cone revealing radar, which enables a brilliant stealth experience in which Bond-like gambits are easily planned and executed. But its true highlight are the bosses, each a perfectly executed duel with its own bespoke mechanics. The fan favorite, of course, being Psycho Mantis, whose mind-reading powers gave players a start and whose input-inverting powers could only be overcome by switching controller ports. But really, every single one of Metal Gear Solid's Wild Rogues gallery is a special showdown in its own right. There are arguments to be made that later Metal Gear Solid entries went on to offer better experiences. But despite their respective achievements, none of them, nor any other game on this list, are anywhere close to being as truly revolutionary, memorable, or timeless as the original. Metal Gear Solid is the PlayStation game. And there you have it, IGN's top 100 PlayStation games of all time, as decided upon and argued about extensively by numerous members of our editorial staff. Now, odds are your personal top 100 PlayStation games aren't the same exact games in the same exact order, so hop in the comments and tell us what should have made the list, or what did make the list that shouldn't have, or which game was ranked too high or too low. Or if you want a real challenge, tell us your full top 100 PlayStation games. It's harder than it sounds. Keep an eye out for more big lists like this, or check out IGN's top 100 games of all time. Though that one's a couple years old. Did any big games come out in 2023? Yeah, we should probably look into updating that. In the meantime, keep it locked right here on IGN.